Hey, youth fam, it's Brandon, youth pastor for Simple Church. And today I get the privilege of continuing our series, Goals, where we've been looking at the story of Nehemiah as we talk about setting goals for the year 2021. And 2 weeks ago, we started this series by talking about New Year's resolutions. Well, did you know that after 2 weeks, statistically, most people have already given up on their New Year's resolutions? In fact, by the end of January, fewer than 25% of people are still going to be committed to their goals. And as I look at this statistic, I begin to wonder, why do we do this? Why are we able to set goals for ourselves and then just ignore them? Why is it we can easily define what is important to us, yet at the same time just as easily give up on them for something less important? Why do we do that? Why do I do that? Why do you do that? And as I've thought about this more and more, I think I've discovered the problem. And it's something that I imagine most of us, if not all of us, have in common. And that's that we are easily distracted. But what I've also discovered, and I wonder if you can relate, is that the things I get distracted by are never as important as the thing I get distracted from. And the reality with this fact is that some things that we get distracted by don't really have that big of an impact on our life, but then there are others. Other things that a couple weeks, months, or even years later leave us wondering, how did I end up on this path? How have I gotten so far away from the goal I intended? How have I gotten so far away from the life I intended? And so before we continue, I want to ask you a question. What is it for you? What is the one thing for you that is most important this year? Is it a habit you'd like to break? A project you want to finish? A relationship you must restore? Or maybe a relationship you need to end? Or even a spiritual habit you'd like to begin? Whatever it is, I'm sure it looks different than mine or the person next to you, but either way, I've got some good news and some bad news. First, the bad news is if you haven't already, you're going to experience opposition, frustration, and a lack of motivation on your way to achieving your goal. Urgent things, both good and bad, are going to come up this year that will potentially distract you from that one thing. But the good news is that there's something you can decide to do today to give you direction and bring you back on path in the midst of those distractions. Something Nehemiah decided to do in his story that I believe will help you and I today. Because here's the deal. I don't want what's urgent this year to distract you from what's important. And so if you want to finish this year, if you need to finish this year, I promise today will help. And so again, we're in the middle of this story about a guy named Nehemiah. And just as a recap, Nehemiah was this guy who served King of Persia. He was a Jew, but he was also the cupbearer to the king. But he discovered his hometown, Jerusalem, was in ruin. And that broke his heart. So he asked the king if he could go back to his hometown to rebuild it. And with God's favor, the king let him. And so Nehemiah heads to Jerusalem and gets right to work. In fact, he convinced tons of people living in Jerusalem to work together and repair the city walls. And so in Nehemiah 3, we find this long list of each different family member in the city of Jerusalem and the area of the wall they were responsible for repairing. And at first, you kind of read this section and you begin to wonder why are all these boring details in here? Why do I need to know this? But really, it's the incredible thing about the details that matters, is that there were so many people involved. This wasn't a project Nehemiah could have done on his own. This was a team effort, or in other words, it took teamwork to make the dream work. But as incredible as all this was, it did not come without opposition. It did not come without distraction. In fact, not a chapter later, we learn about this guy named Sanballat. You can think of him as the villain, Nehemiah's arch nemesis, because you see him and others had been benefiting from Jerusalem being in shambles. They'd been taking advantage of the people living there, and they didn't want that to stop. And so we read about Sanballat's reaction to the walls being rebuilt in Nehemiah 4, 1-3, where it says, Sanballat was very angry when he learned that we were rebuilding the wall. He flew into rage and mocked the Jews, saying in front of his friends and the Samaritan army officers, "What does this bunch of poor, feeble Jews think they're doing? Do they think they can build the wall in a single day by just offering a few sacrifices? Do they actually think they can make something of stones from a rubbish heap, and charred ones at that?" Tobiah the Ammonite, who was standing beside him, remarked, "That stone wall would collapse even if a fox walked along the top of it." Now I wonder, how would you respond to this? I know how I'd respond. I would say something back. I would fight back. Those are fighting words, right? Sanballat and his thugs can't talk to me like that. It's urgent that I let them know they're wrong. But check out how Nehemiah responds. In Nehemiah 4:4-6, we read his words as he writes, "Then I prayed, 'Hear us, our God, for we are being mocked. May their scoffing fall back on their own heads, and may they themselves become captives in a foreign land. Do not ignore their guilt. Do not blot out their sins, for they have provoked you to anger here in front of the builders.' At last, the wall was completed to half its height around the entire city, for the people had worked with enthusiasm." And so we see here that Nehemiah faced opposition from people who didn't want him to succeed. These people attacked his efforts, both verbally and physically. They called the Israelites weak, mocked the quality of their work, mocked their pain, mocked their beliefs, tried to crush their hope, and even came at them with swords. But Nehemiah didn't get distracted or discouraged by doing three things. First, Nehemiah didn't let the urgent distract him. He didn't fight with these guys. He didn't add to their drama. He didn't even respond. Secondly, Nehemiah took it to God. He asked God to hear his prayers and make it right. And he wasn't afraid to be honest with God about what he was feeling by telling him he wanted those guys to be punished. And finally, Nehemiah kept going. He and his team kept building, no matter what those guys had to say. And by doing so, they rebuilt the wall to half its original height, and everyone poured their hearts into it. That's amazing. Because ultimately, Nehemiah didn't let the urgent distract him from what's important, because he trusted God with it. And I wish I could tell you Nehemiah's opposition ended there, but it didn't. He faced even more obstacles as you continue to read on in chapter 4 and into chapter 5 and 6, both from his enemies and from his fellow Jewish people. And of course, Sanballat wasn't giving up. Since verbal mocking and physical force failed to work, he turned to deceit and trickery by inviting Nehemiah to lunch. Nehemiah 6:1-2, we read about it. It says, "Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem the Arab, and the rest of our enemies found out that I had finished rebuilding the wall, and that no gaps remained, though we had not yet set up the doors and the gates. So Sanballat and Geshem sent a message asking me to meet them at one of the villages in the plain of Ono." I think this part of the story is so important because it's a lot easier to recognize our distractions when they are bad things. But sometimes distractions can appear as good things. Like a Sanballat saying, "Hey, let's get lunch. Let's go out for coffee. You know what? I was wrong. Let's work things out. Just come meet me and we'll work it out." Or maybe a friend asking you to go out and party on a Friday night. Or maybe that temptation to stay up a couple more hours to finish that grind through that video game, or just finish that binge through that show on Netflix. Or even just saying yes to another thing, saying yes to help out with something else. And here's the thing. I'm not saying these things are bad. Most of them are good things. God has blessed us with these types of things in our life. But Nehemiah realized something that I think we would be good to realize these things as well. He says in Nehemiah 6:2, "But I realized they were plotting to harm me." See, Sanballat and his cronies were planning on getting Nehemiah alone so they could kill him. And Nehemiah realized this. He realized that the thing that was disguised as good would actually harm him. And although the things that are distracting you may not kill you, if you keep saying yes to certain hobbies, certain pastimes, certain relationships, or certain invitations, it may just kill the opportunity God is giving you. And this is important because you are going to be presented with so many good opportunities this year. And it's not really about whether they are good or bad. It's more about whether they are wise or unwise. And so the statement that Nehemiah makes that I think would be a good one for us to remember this year as well is found in the next verse, where we are told, "And I sent messengers to them saying, 'I'm doing a great work and I cannot come down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and come down to you?'" Nehemiah tells his distraction, "I'm doing a great work and I cannot come down." In other words, he responds by saying, "You know what? That looks great and all, but what God has for me right here is more important. And why would I leave it? Why would I lower myself to something of less importance?" And this begs the same question for me and you, us. Why would we do that? Why would we give up what is important for something of less importance? And so again, I ask, what is the one thing God has set before you this year? What is it that is most important? And what is your biggest distraction from it? See, Nehemiah gave up the luxury of going out so he could see the completion of what was truly important. He decided ahead of time what was most important and didn't let other things distract him from it. In fact, we were told that Sanballat came back with the same question 4 more times, and each time Nehemiah responded the same. And so in the same way, I want to encourage you to decide what is most important and don't get distracted. The next time you face opposition or distraction, repeat to yourself, I am doing a great work and I cannot come down. Say it now. I am doing a great work and I cannot come down. Put it somewhere where you'll see it every day and repeat it. I am doing a great work and I cannot come down. Because here's what I know. There is a great work for you to do this year. God has gifted you and has you here for a purpose. He has a goal for you. But not only that, God will give you the strength to see it through. I don't know if you noticed or not, but there are no miracles or acts of God found in the book of Nehemiah. But instead, God working through Nehemiah to complete an amazing God-sized goal. And all it took was Nehemiah pre-deciding he would stay committed to God and the goal that God had set before him. And God can work through you too. In fact, he wants to. Just like Nehemiah, you won't be without opposition or distraction this year. But also like Nehemiah, you can take confidence knowing that no matter what distractions or oppositions the world throws at you, God gives us strength to pursue God-sized goals. All that is required of you and me is to make a decision ahead of time, to decide we will stay committed to God and committed to the goal he has for us, to respond the same way Nehemiah did. I am doing a great work and I cannot come down.